Good evening and welcome to Flat Earth UK Live. Joining me tonight is Jeff Stewart. How you doing, Jeff?
I am doing fine, Nathan. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm not too bad. Not too bad at all. As I'm sure you've watched the show before, Jeff, I always kick off by asking fellow flat earthers how they found out the Earth is flat. So maybe you can start us off by telling us exactly that. How did you find out the Earth is flat?
Well, I found it out a couple of times until I realized it the third time. But the final time was about 2 years ago. I was just meandering around on YouTube looking for something to watch, and under one of the recommended videos, it was Matt Powerland's presentation. And it was a showstopper for me. I mean, as cheesy as the thing was, it was the comedy that pulled me in and made me start looking at things and realizing that all this time, a lot of things have been staring me in the face, and I just never paid attention to them. So it was about 2 years ago, and it was Matt Powerland.
Which specific video was it?
His comedy presentation. You know, is the picture real, or is the painting, or is it a picture? Is it a painting, or is it a picture?
Gotcha. The one that Eric DeBay... No, that was his interview that Eric DeBay posted, wasn't it? It's the one where he was actually on stage saying photo.
He was on stage wearing a pair of cheesy sunglasses.
I've gotcha. I mean, how did you get from watching a few Matt Powerland videos to making videos yourself?
Well, after I saw the presentation and I started following Matt, and then I became friends with him. And, you know, he was telling me for a long time, you need to start making videos too. You need to start making videos too. And I really, I didn't for a long time. I probably was a flat earther for a year or better than a year before I actually made my first video.
What was that? What was the first video on?
I think it was just a coming out kind of party. I don't even know if I have it as a public video now or not, but it was shortly after the first or second video that I put up that I started doing the Debunk the Debunkers series.
Ah, okay, fair enough. I mean, I know you've done lots of great debunking videos, but you've also done quite a few proofs. One which was quite specifically about the sun and the way it works. I mean, maybe you could describe that specific phenomena that proves the sun is close.
Just through crepuscular sun rays.
Precisely.
I mean, it's as simple as it gets, really. It's a very simple proof, and that's what I really like picking out, is the stuff that's easy for anybody to understand. It doesn't matter whether you're a kindergartner or whether you're a college professor. Things that have to do with perspective, basic geometry. You know, the flat earth is easy to prove 9 ways to Sunday, and you don't need a compass, a telescope, or anything. You can just use things that you can observe in nature.
Maybe you can explain to somebody who has no idea what crepuscular rays are. What exactly is a crepuscular ray, or what are crepuscular rays?
Crepuscular sun rays is when the sun hits the clouds and it disperses, or it throws out angular rays down towards the ground. Whereas the sun is supposed to be 93 million miles away, and at 93 million miles away, there would be no singular hot spot on a cloud in your visible range. It should be the whole sky is lit up with rays coming through at a 90-degree angle to you, or if you're laid on the ground at 90-degree angle. Crepuscular sun rays, everybody's seen them. It's shows the sun very close to the top of the clouds and throwing out rays at an angle. And if you just draw lines on those rays, you can find the sun. Just like if it was a street light and somebody had covered up the street light, you could still use the angle of the light from the ground to figure out exactly where the light is.
That's it. I tried to explain that exact example to my family recently. I know you were on a nice cruise recently. I went down to my local beach. not quite as impressive, but nevertheless, I was trying to explain cospecular rays by drawing that out in the sand and explaining that none of the rays that hit us from 96 million miles away should come at an angle. They should all come, like you say, exactly at 90 degrees, and we shouldn't be able to track that path. And there certainly shouldn't be any hotspots at the time down at our local beach. There was literally a hotspot above the water, and the clouds were completely obscuring the sun. But as you say, you could just track the angles of the lights back up to the sun and figure out exactly where it was, even though you couldn't see it.
Right. And, a lot of the naysayers will say, no, that is because when the sun rays hit the upper atmosphere, they kind of get redirected into that hot spot, when that's not how it works. It would only work like that if our atmosphere was convex or concave. That's the only time it would do that. Because it's convex, the rays, they should be straight coming on in. You should not see a hot spot from your perspective standing on the ground. You should not see a hot spot in the clouds at all. All the sun's rays should flow in across your visible horizon.
That's it.
And there's a ton of videos, where people have sent up hot air balloons, and you can see that nice rich hot spot right on the clouds. It's not very big, and it could not be like that if the sun was 93 million miles away.
No, definitely not. I mean, maybe moving on from the sun, it's something maybe a bit closer to home. We've got the moon, and the moon is a great topic because men have been there, or maybe not. Do you think men have been to the moon, Jeff?
Nope.
You don't? Wow,
No.
That's a revelation. Tell us why you don't think men went to the moon.
I used to believe men went to the moon. Well, there's a lot of different things. I mean, whether you want to pick their videos apart, and show that it was done on a movie stage somewhere. There's all sorts of things just in their own. That's the worst thing about NASA is they're so sloppy, they don't even, you can tell they don't even care. They got so many people in the bag as believers, they don't care who and how many non-believers there are, because nobody really thinks that NASA lies about anything. And but it's a double-edged sword for them, in my opinion, because everything that they've ever put out is CGI, or it's fake, or it's just sloppy. A recent version of a Star Trek movie is more believable than a NASA film. Now, it's funny, when I was a kid, my grandfather, he told me that the moon landings were fake. They did it in a movie studio. I'm 50. So? I'm 50, and I was probably 8, 9, 10 years old when he told me that. And we were talking about, he thought pro wrestling was real, but the moon landings were fake. And I used to think that was so funny. I used to tell people about that because I thought it was just absurd that he would believe the moon landings were fake, but pro wrestling was real. And now looking back on it, I laugh with him because, pro wrestling was much more real than the moon landings were.
Yeah, had a bit more polish to it.
So, it's not like this is a new idea. It's not like people just now started thinking NASA. And my granddaddy was he was a tobacco farmer in North Carolina. He wasn't rich. He was poor. And, he was one of those people that, he told you like he saw it. And it's funny,
ultimately he didn't see it. He watched it on the TV and saw bullshit where it was bullshit.
Well, he probably heard it on the radio, and then he watched it on TV. When I was 8 years old, there was no color TV. There was only black and white TV. It'd take about 30 minutes to turn your TV on. You know, you turn it on and you just see a little white dot in the middle of the screen for about 30 minutes till the tube's warmed up in it. So,
Cheese TVs, wow, that is going back some. So, do you think men have been to the ISS then? I mean, there's a dot that floats around above our heads. Is the men on that little dot?
I think two ways about this. Number one is if the ISS, as you see long-term people long-term on video, like more than 30 seconds. And a lot of people will say, no, this is the zero-G plane that they're doing this in. And there's plenty of evidence to support that that's exactly what's going on. But NASA, 80% of their budget is spent on balloons, not rockets, not spaceships. 80% of NASA's budget goes into their balloon program out of Antarctica.
Is that so?
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, NASA is the head of the Department of Defense. I don't know. Did you ever watch any? Did you ever watch any of the interviews that I was doing with Robert Bassano?
Yeah, I think I'm sure I've caught at least a few excerpts with Rob.
There is more than enough NASA evidence that says they didn't go anywhere. You know, even NASA says they didn't go anywhere in so many words. The highest they've ever been to is 117 miles. Or so in order for this space station to exist as a space station, it's not going to be like you see it, not on TV. I mean, if you think about being on a submarine, which is a whole lot less volatile than being in space, you know, people are real particular about how they move and interact on a submarine. And you don't walk through a submarine and leave all the doors open and all the hatches and stuff like that. I mean, that's a good way to get extra duty and get thrown off a boat. And if you look at all the space station videos, you know, every time you see them, the hatches are always open, and they don't put the space station up there as they want you to think it is, as it exists, with the different, you know, with the different pods. You know, they break it up like that. It's not like they couldn't take up bigger things in the space shuttle. The space shuttle cargo bay was 24 feet by 63 feet. And the pods on the space station are 14 feet by, I think it's 33 feet, 34 feet. So they could have taken pods up that were much bigger, if they're up there at all. I'm just saying that, you know, when you're looking at NASA stuff, they give you information that conflicts with each other. So you're always trying to pick it apart and figure out, well, exactly what is the truth, if there is any truth in here whatsoever. And it's easy to, when you're talking about this stuff, it's very easy to digress and get off into other subjects and areas that, you know, when it comes to NASA, it's NASA couldn't take anything that they do to court.
How do you mean? What do you mean by that?
Because they couldn't prove it. They couldn't prove anything.
Right.
They couldn't prove that they do anything in a court of law.
It's none of it's real proof.
Right. I mean, the only proof that they have that they exist, that they do the things that they did, is in the minds of people that believe them.
I mean, talking of proof, Jeff, you am I right in saying you're a quartermaster? Is that right?
I was.
I mean, what equipment were you privy to when you were working in the armed forces that proved the Earth is flat?
Well, I mean, I've used a variety of things, but you know, I was in the Navy from '88. I joined in '87. I was 17 years old, and I wanted to be in the Navy band. And my mom and dad had to sign me in because I was not 18 yet. And so my mom made the recruiter sign a contract saying that I would have a chance to try out for the Navy band. Because up until that time, I was a professional French horn player. I mean, at the age of 17, I was a professional French horn player. I played in the North Carolina Symphony. I was the youngest paid musician in the North Carolina Symphony. I played in the Wilmington Symphony. I played in a quintet. I was always going through school. I was always honors band, honors orchestra. I played in the McDonald's marching band 3 years in a row, which is very hard to get into. And I was good. So I knew that, all I had to do was be able to try out and I would be able to make it. Navy band was supposed to be like gravy kind of duty. So anyway, my mom made the recruiter promise that I would have a chance to try out for the Navy band. And, he signed a contract, went to boot camp in Great Lakes. And I also played in the boot camp band. He put me in at the right time where they were forming up the 923 company, which is the band, drill team, and choir. And this is every week they form up a 923 company or a 900 company, which is a band, drill team. And so every week there's a new class graduating from boot camp. And so anyway, so about halfway through boot camp, I went to the main side across the highway to the regular Navy base and tried out. I had 3 guys that was throwing sheet music in front of me, and I was knocking it all out. And, after I was done, they said, we'd be more than happy to have you in the band. And, but the problem we have is we don't have a French horn chair available for you anywhere. So you're either going to have to wait for somebody to die or get discharged. He said that could be a week. Go ahead.
I said, oh dear, that's not so good.
Well, I mean, and they didn't know. They didn't know whether it'd be a week or a month or a year. They couldn't tell me. And so, they told me, they said, so when you go back across the highway, when you go see the job people next week or the MOS people, you are going to have to pick something. Even though we've accepted you into the Navy band, you can't go anywhere except somewhere else until a chair comes available for you. And so anyway, I go back across the highway, and about a week later, I go back to the job people, and they're saying, yes, you're qualified for the Navy band. They've accepted you there, but until the chair comes open for you, you got to find something else to do. So we're looking at your qualifications here, and the only thing that you're really qualified to do besides playing in the band is going to Quartermaster A school. And I was like, well, what's Quartermaster A school? And he said, well, it's the navigator. You drive the boat. And I said, but I don't want to go out on a boat. And he said, son, you're in the Navy. So anyway, after I graduated from boot camp, I went to Quartermaster A school in Orlando, Florida, and graduated about 10th in my class. I didn't have a choice of orders. When you graduate from A school, Quartermaster A school, if you're in the top 5, you can pretty much pick the boat you want to be on. But I was about 10th out of maybe 30 guys. And I got assigned to the USS Valley Forge. There was 2 USS Valley Forges. One was an aircraft carrier, and one was a guided missile cruiser. And I was on the guided missile cruiser. And now we're getting into it. Was a weaponized boat. So everything, when it comes to the flat earth, you must, when I'm talking about my Navy experiences, remember, until everybody, including yourself, came about to realizing it was flat and not a globe, everything else you did in life, the question never came up at all. for the first 2 years I was on the Valley Forge, we had a regular electronics warfare suite, which included everything from sonar to surface search radar to gun control radar, a lot of different things, but nothing like the Aegis system, which was installed. We were the first destroyer in the first cruiser in the Navy. This was in 1989 that we were outfitted with the Aegis combat system, and we were the first boat with the Aegis combat system, and it was very discombobulated in that it didn't work then like it does now. On this particular boat, we had everything from harpoon systems to we had missiles, we had 5-inch gun, we had quad 50s, we had torpedoes, but everything worked by itself, and there was fire control for every individual gun system. Anything that would shoot something, it was all individual fire control systems. Meaning there was a group of guys for every different weapons platform on the boat. When they brought Aegis and installed Aegis on the boat, they integrated everything into one fire control system. Because we were not originally outfitted with the Aegis, everything was kind of half-ass patched. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say that. Everything was kind of jury-rigged into our current visual systems and electronic systems, whether it be scopes, whether it be radar, whether it be, and then they added the cameras. We did have a camera, but it wasn't like the Aegis combat system camera. The Aegis combat system camera also worked with an infrared laser.
Now you're talking.
Huh?
I said, now you're talking.
So, before the Aegis system, when we were out on patrol, we were just boxing, going from here to there and doing circles the whole way. And if we picked up something, it could be anything from a tugboat to a oil rig to a cruise ship to another Navy vessel to anything. And we pick it up on radar, and generally we could pick it up 300 miles out, 350, 400 miles out on a clear day. We could pick up anything on the radar. And we would box our way to it until we could get it in the visual range. And, this was before the Aegis system. And before the Aegis system, the only thing we could shoot at another boat without being in visual range was anything that was connected to radar, which was our missile system and our torpedo system. So, and back then when I first got on that boat, man, we didn't shoot that many missiles. We didn't launch that many missiles at any particular thing. We did test firings, but, back then before the Aegis system came on, it was, shoot and pray. It was, most guys say, you can't hit the broadside of a barn with that harpoon or that, or that missile. You can't hit nothing with it. And, you'd be better off shooting a torpedo at it. You'd be better off, unloading, your 5-inch gun on it. So the guided missiles were not so good at all. And so anyway, so we could get anything in a visual range would be 10 to 20 miles would be visual range. Anything we could see with binoculars anything we could, that'd be visual range. Now, and then you got radar range that goes out to about 300 miles. Now, when they installed the Aegis system, they upgraded our radar.
Sorry, Jeff, before you go on,
yeah.
we've brushed over that because we both understand exactly what that means. But you've thrown out a few numbers there, including spotting things at 400 miles on radar. Can you just explain to people who are watching this and haven't got the slightest clue what that means in flat Earth terms? Why it is what it is in terms of flat Earth, why it disproves the globe, just rather than brushing over it and throwing out some big numbers.
Okay, yeah. If you're new to the flat Earth, basically always keep these are the numbers you want to keep in mind. 100 miles is 6,000 feet. 100 miles is 6,000 feet of curvature. Right. So anything that's 100 miles away should be...
100 miles, you shouldn't be able to see anything on radar because the land, or in this case the sea, has dropped away by how many feet?
6,666 feet.
Of course. So yeah, 100 miles, 6,666 feet is how much the land should have dropped away. But you can spot things with radar at 100 miles. Alas, you can see it at 400 miles. Was that the biggest number you said?
Yeah, I mean, before the Aegis, yes. Before Aegis.
Okay, what's Aegis?
Aegis is an integrated computerized combat system which integrates all the other weapons platforms on your boat all into one concise little unit. To where one guy can sit down and he can fire everything from torpedoes to guided missiles to the 5-inch gun to even now on the newer ships, even the machine guns are operated by the Aegis, the miniguns and machine guns.
What is it? Is it a laser targeting? Is it narrowband radar? What is it?
Yeah, the Aegis integrates an infrared laser into a camera that can see that laser. And then points everything at that dot. And
gotcha.
when they
literally, sorry, Jeff. Again, I'm going to break this down. I know I'm dumbing it down as much as I can for people watching that may not understand. So you've got how far out could you target with Aegis?
The infrared lasers that we were using. Remember, now this was the first system, so we had basic stuff compared to what they got today. But sure. We could laser.
How far were you painting a target?
On a regular basis, between 75 and 90 miles.
So, in other words, you've got direct line of sight
to the hull.
You have a tool, a measuring piece of equipment, if you will, that you can actually put a light, if you will, on that thing at 70 or 80 miles away, and then use a camera to actually look at you putting a light on it. None of which should be possible if we're on a globe. Is that correct?
No, that's incorrect. We could paint a target. Okay. We could paint a target up to 112 miles, but the spread of the beam would be incoherent to the computer or the camera that was looking at it. The camera would only interpret that beam up to a certain spread. So the spread at about 90 miles was your most. That was the farthest you could actually light something up and shoot at it.
Wow, but still huge number. 90 miles, you can paint a target, put a light on it, fire a laser at it, however you want to phrase it, and then see that. And essentially, you could send a missile, a bullet, whatever, at that item.
Absolutely, and we targeted everything at the waterline. Now the laser sat on top of the bridge. The camera and the laser was all one unit. And they sat on top of the bridge, on the roof of the bridge. And that was 63 feet off of the water. But we targeted vessels at the waterline. You don't target another boat at anything but the waterline because your objective is to sink the boat. So if you just blow a bunch of holes in the top of it, you're not going to sink it. You might kill some people, but you're not going to sink it. The object when you're shooting at another ship is you want that ship at the bottom of the ocean. So you target at the waterline. So when you punch a hole in it, it starts taking on water.
That's
So
so
it's not.
cool. I mean, I'm wrapping my head around it because it's such big numbers, but this is flat proof. You know, there's no other way to describe it. It's proof of.
Oh, and it's probably more than that now. I would imagine now that, they can, with the Aegis system, they can target boats that are probably 200, 300 miles away.
Amazing.
They can target them as far as they can see it on radar. I'm sure that the infrared lasers that they have now are, made what we were using look like, something you could buy at Walmart or something. I mean, it's technology for the military, just it grows. It's
sure. Where there's a beam divergence at 90 miles in, did you say it's 1985? So 30 miles down the line, that divergence will have only improved, and therefore you can target things further away on the flat plane.
But back then, if somebody would have wrote the curvature chart on the windscreen of the bridge, I might have turned around and looked at somebody and said, "Hey, how y'all reckon we can see that?" But see, you just always assume that the curve is, you don't even think about it no more than I thought about, what color my mom's kitchen was. I mean, it's just, nobody talked about it. It didn't come up. It was, I guess you just assumed that the curvature was there. But,
I mean, you said you had a couple of realizations of the flatness of our Earth. Was one of those realizations while you were out at sea, or was it more recent that you had those?
No, that was the first example that I was given of that it's not a globe at 25,000 miles in diameter. It was staring me right in the face then, but nobody talked about it. It wasn't anything that, the Earth was a globe. And so, like I said, if somebody would have wrote the curvature down and put it into a chart of miles, maybe I would have asked somebody something. But I didn't, because, you just, it's a globe, damn it. So, I worked with a guy, it's about 5 or 6 years ago. I was working with a guy, and we'd eat lunch together, and he was always showing me, he always kept his laptop in the car, and we'd eat lunch in his car out in the parking lot. And so he was always talking about these things on the moon, and I called them moon crickets, and he called them like, some sort of aliens that was building structures and stuff on the moon. And I didn't take him seriously at all. I thought he was a fruitcake. And he asked me about the same thing you did. He was like, "What'd you do in the Navy?" And I was telling him what I did in the Navy, and he was like, "Well, and a lot of people, might be listening. Let me back up a little bit. A lot of people might be listening to this, think, well, wait a minute, he was a quartermaster. What did he have to do with the fire control system?" Well, honestly, nothing. But everything that they used in the Aegis system was everything that I saw while I was on the bridge. I was looking at the same monitors that the fire control guys were looking at. I could see the outline of the ships. I could see the laser dot on the ships. I could see all the targeting information. I could see everything. I wasn't personally targeting anything, but I was watching other people do it. And I could see all the information.
You go out on deck, you grab a pair of binoculars from time to time as well.
Oh, yeah. We had binoculars mounted on the rails on either side of the bridge that they were so big you couldn't hold them. And you could see stuff. Man, you could see stuff 20 miles, 25, 30 miles on a clear day. Easy.
Which, again, is not possible on a globe. It should be so far beyond.
Obviously, yes, it is. It's not possible on a globe. But even today, you got people looking through them same binoculars that don't think nothing about it being a globe or if it's flat. It's a globe.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. When I had that conversation about cospecular rays and explained it with a diagram, the response I got was no.
Yeah, so I was eating lunch with this guy, and he was talking about these moon crickets and building structures on the moon, and he was showing me the curvature chart. This is 5 or 6 years ago. And this was the first flat earther. He never said nothing about the earth being flat. He was just showing me the curvature chart. And I looked at it and I didn't even think anything about my Navy experiences when I was looking at his curvature chart. It didn't even dawn on me. And everything that he'd been showing me before, I just thought dude was totally bonkers anyway. So I just didn't pay any attention to him. And again, second time that's happened, staring me right in the face, and yet I ignore it. So what would make it, me listen to a guy named Matt Powerland? Well, it's because he hit me through a comedy. He where my defenses were down, my global defenses were down. And, he goes through the perspective on what's real and what's fake.
Can you explain again, Jeff, before we brush over this, because that's a pretty critical thing. Can you explain exactly what concept Matt Powerland used to get you woken up to flat Earth? Can you explain that? Give it a bit more detail. Sure.
Matt is weird as he is. He is a real deal artist in every sense of the word. I mean, yeah, he does some bunch of floor painting now, but back when he was a kid, he was a photorealist, meaning you could give him a picture of anything, a person, a waterfall, a field of flowers, and he could paint that picture. He could paint that picture on canvas and his painting would look more real than the picture he was given. So his presentation where he's showing you stuff, it's stuff that he painted. Now, he was a Canadian national icon when he was 5 or 6 years old. He was national news of the kid that could paint better than anybody else. And that's how Matt Powerland actually got started. He was started at a very young age. He was a natural painter. He's a natural crazy person now because he got left out in the flat earth for too long by himself. But what he did know was, what's the difference between a picture and a painting? His perspective was everything. So when he looked at pictures that NASA was putting out, he was like, this is not a picture. This is a painting. I know because I could paint it. And, he did, supposedly work for NASA, but it wouldn't even matter if he did or he didn't. The truth is, people have since, he's brought everything forward. There's been a lot of people out there that have taken all the images off of that NASA's website. They do stuff like put them through photo forensics. They put them through Photoshop and all the filters in Photoshop, and they can clearly see that everything NASA has on their website that they call a picture is an actual Photoshopped image. It's not a picture. So you never seen a real photo of the Earth. Nobody has. At all. Ever. There's no real pictures of the Earth from space. Not one.
It's a pretty mind-blowing concept to wrap your head around, that there are no photos, it's all just CGI and artwork. I mean, this is a pretty massive revelation, and that was obviously your starting point. But how, from there to now, how has it affected your day-to-day life or your family life and your personal life, finding out that there's massive lies and that the Earth is flat?
Well, I think that everybody kind of has the same personal problems with it, and then everybody has their own unique experiences as well. But the common denominators are, you can't talk about it to most people because they just think you're crazy. It doesn't matter what kind of proof you have in your pocket to show them; they don't want to see it. The cognitive dissonance when it comes down to the globe is It's a Stockholm syndrome of proportions that are unequaled in every other truth, whether it be from the Gulf of Tonkin to Spanish mines in Havana Harbor to the money to war, drugs. You name any kind of truth movement there is out there, and what kind of truth they're talking about, and even the most open-minded person who's willing to let go of a lot of things and personal beliefs to just look at the evidence and see what the evidence says about mostly everything when it comes down to the globe. They just can't wrap their mind around the lie. They cannot accept that they would have lied about that when they can readily accept that they've lied about everything. Absolutely everything. Doesn't matter what it is, they lie. And whether they're intentionally lying or whether they're lying just through ignorance, they're still lying. And that it's funny that when people actually, when they realize that it's not a globe, it's not whether it's flat or not, it's when they realize it's not the model being portrayed in education, which is a spheroidish, whether it be an oblate spheroid, whether it be shaped like a pear, a banana, or a perfect sphere. It doesn't matter. It just look at their model, which is the equator at 25,000 miles in diameter. It's spinning at about 1,100 miles an hour, which in turn is rotating around a sun, and its path around the sun is an oblate orbit, not a perfectly spherical orbit or a perfect circle. It's a spheroidish orbit, and it's traveling at anywhere between 70,000 miles an hour and 83,000 miles an hour. And then that sun that it's orbiting around is screaming through the galaxy at about 500,000 miles an hour on an arc. It's not even going straight, meaning the sun will eventually, by their own model figures, get back to where it started at. It's moving in a circle. It's on an arc. So, everything about the global model is farcical at best. But then when people realize that it's not the model that they say it is, it's hard for them to discuss this with friends and family and everything else. Imagine
on to why people brace against it, and there's a lot of obviously hatred directed towards flat earthers. Before I got to that, Jeff, I kind of wanted to find out on a more personal level how it's affected you.
It's something I think about every day for as long as I've been thinking about it. I think about it every day. I think about everything, not the lies, not the NASA lies, not anything other. I just think about perspective and how come more people don't realize what it's not. And I never have been able to put my finger on it. When you talk about the ostracization of the flat earth or the term flat earth, there is no other two words put together that bring about more hatred. And
why do you think that is, though, Jeff?
I think because, back when they were pushing the globe model and you were liable to be put and burned on a stake for saying it was flat. If you allow me to just stop and tell a quick little story.
You go ahead, Jeff. The floor's all yours, mate.
a fella, I think it was in Tennessee, a chicken farmer. He raised chickens, and they were free-range indoor chickens. They had never actually been outside, but they weren't in cages either. It was like one big warehouse, chickens, right? And they could freely run around inside this big chicken warehouse. They had never seen a live bird. They had never seen a dog. They had never seen a cat. They were hatched. They grew. They laid eggs. They hatched those eggs. Those turned into chickens who laid eggs. It turned into chickens that laid eggs. It turned into chickens that laid eggs. And the guy just did an experiment for whatever reason, whether somebody approached him about it or whatever. But what they did was they put the shadow of a chicken hawk on the ceiling of the warehouse. And the chickens went bonkers. These chickens had never seen a bird. They had never seen any other wild animal. They had never seen anything from generation to generation to generation to generation. And yet, when they put the shadow of a chicken hawk on the ceiling, the birds went absolutely insane. It was it was innate. They were born with the knowledge of that shadow. Now, when it comes to flat Earth, I as much as I don't want to say that it shouldn't be innate, but think about the chicken hawk and think about the chicken. Why is the chicken so scared of the chicken hawk? Because the chicken hawk brings death. And anytime anything brings death, that's when the innate things come about, whether it be food or death. And the only way I can say that the words flat Earth bring up such emotional feedback from people, the cognitive dissonance, the absolute hatred, is something like the chicken hawk and the chicken. And that's because people were absolutely getting burned on the stake 500 years ago and more. Now, people might out there who is in their, 20s and 30s that don't know history and don't, it wasn't that long ago. It was, they stopped burning people on the stake about 300 years ago. They stopped burning people on the stake about 300 years ago. But it still went on, even, privately. Just like the KKK was a public entity and then it was a private entity. Well, the people getting burned on the stake as witches was a private entity up until about 200 years ago. But as far as like mass public stake burnings, that was happening 300 years ago. It wasn't that long ago. We're talking 4 generations of people. And why would people get burned on the stake 300 years ago and 400 years ago and 500 years ago and 600 years ago? Because they were going against whatever the state or the church was pushing. And they were labeled as witches, as devils, as anything, just to be burned at the stake. They didn't put you in prison. They burned you on the stake.
So now, why is the globe lie being told then, Jeff? If the penalties that you're describing are so severe, what's the purpose of the lie in your opinion?
I think that it was. I think that everybody answers this about the same, and I'm no different. I think it was to, and although I am not a super religious person, I used to be an atheist. In fact, the dog tags that I had when I was in the Navy said atheist on them. When they asked me in boot camp, about my religious leanings, I told them I was an atheist because I was. I didn't believe in the Bible, and I didn't believe in evolution, but I kind of figured that we was put here and forgot about. Maybe forgot about. But I believed in intelligent design, but that word didn't exist back then, not that I knew of. I believed there was a God, there was something that created us, but I didn't believe anything in the Bible. I didn't believe anything in any book that a man wrote. And when I looked to the lie of the globe and the whatever we're on, whatever enclosed world we exist in, it's a control, meaning if everybody in the world, woke up tomorrow and realized that it is not anything like they say it is, all of a sudden they're not going to want to pay attention to their so-called leaders anymore. They're going to know that somebody else is really in charge of this thing. And that's the only true in charge of this thing that there is or could be.
Sorry, I was having a slight malfunction then.
I think it was to take people away from God.
Yes, sorry, lost my
More
track.
than anything, I think it was to take people away from God. And what easier way to take everybody, away from, that if you are religious or somewhat religious and you believe in evil and you believe in good, if you want to look at the Bible or any other religious text, the Bible is very specific about who's in charge on earth. And it ain't God. It's Satan. And Satan's only job is to deceive you away from God. That's his only job. It's his only job. Satan can't...
I was going to come to this question a bit later, but as we're on the topic now, Jeff, do you believe in God?
Absolutely.
And do you believe in the devil?
Absolutely.
And in that case, would you concede that the powers that should not be may have molded those images just to create more fear and more control?
No. I think that they've done their best to put you on a spinning ball with everything else that's just happenstance. You're just plumb lucky to be here. You weren't created. You evolved from a piece of slime that turned into something, that turned into something, that turned into something, turned into a monkey, that turned into something, that turned into something, all the way down to you. That you are a product of evolution and sheer luck. You're not too close to the sun. You're not too far away. You're just right. You're Goldilocks. This is the Goldilocks zone. There's no other way. Look at all the planets around you. They don't have life on them. You have life here because you're just so darn lucky. And when you really look at it, it doesn't matter what you believe in. You didn't come from an ape. No species has ever evolved into another species. Dogs don't turn into cats. Cats don't turn into dogs. Fish don't turn into other things. Yes, there are evolutional changes in people. But it's not a species changing, evolution.
They tend to do the same thing with evolution as they do with the stars and their distances. So they always try and explain it down in numbers of years that are so astronomical. So you'll never see any evolution.
Yeah. As they keep enough zeros on the end of everything, it just makes you stop asking questions.
Yeah, just make the numbers so big that the stars are so unbelievably far away that, we would never see any difference. And yet we can see them with our naked eye. It's a nonsense.
Well, you know how the distance to the sun was calculated.
Tell us all about it.
93 million miles. You know when and who and how that was calculated. That's a lot of what a lot of people don't understand out there when they're talking about space and theoretical physics and astrophysics. You know, if I said that I was a theoretical history major or a theoretical historian, how would you take that? If you asked me what I graduated, and I graduated from some elite university, let's just say Berkeley or somewhere, you know, and I was a theoretical historian, what would you think about that?
Theoretical historian. I'm not with you, Jeff. You'll have to expand.
If I was a theoretical historian, that means that history would be something that I would theorize. Like I could theorize that, you know, in the United States, the Civil War was won by the South. Well, I could theorize that Germany won World War II. I could theorize all kinds of wild stuff, but I'm just a theorist. So nobody can take what I say with a grain of salt. I'm just theorizing on stuff. It's historical stuff, but I can't prove it. Therefore, it's a theory.
Okay.
The only place this is accepted is in astrophysics or cosmology. It's the only place a theorist is so widely accepted by the scientific body politic. And why is that? If I said I wanted to be a theoretical historian, people would say, "Well, don't you like real history? I mean, don't you understand the history that was written? Don't you understand what's already out there?" And I'd say, "Well, I understand it, but I don't like it. So if I could change it, I can change it by being a theoretical historian. But let me write the new history books." And they'd say, "Well, hell no, you can't write the history books." Well, that's exactly what happened with science. You have theory after theory after theory. When it comes to the globe model, it can only exist if you accept a bunch of other theoretical things, like gravity. It's the universal fix-all patch that makes everything else work. If you can't come up with another explanation, you can always just call it gravity, because gravity is it's the ultimate fix-all patch. I've heard the globalists say, "Well, it's all held together by the force of gravity." And you go, "Hey, gravity can't be a force." They say, why can't it be a force? And you say, well, because force is, the equation for force is mass squared times velocity squared, or acceleration squared. Mass squared times acceleration squared. So what is the mass of gravity? In order for gravity to be a force, you have to be able to measure that gravity's mass. And you have to measure that gravity's acceleration. Well, gravity doesn't have a mass and it doesn't have an acceleration, so therefore it can't be a force.
Sorry, Jeff. Did you see Brian Mullen rip apart gravity and explain exactly that, but using all of the maths?
No.
I mean, he basically, you've boiled it down really nicely, but he just does it by ripping the maths to pieces, or the math to pieces.
Well, I mean, when it comes to science and it comes to numbers and whether it be the distance to something or the temperature of something or whatever, they'll always talk about it as it's a measurement, like they measured something when it's truly a calculation. And there's a big difference between those two words. A measurement is something that you can measure, like with a yardstick. You can measure it over and over and over and over. A calculation is just a good guess. I mean, it's a basic definition of a calculation, but when they say the sun is 93 million miles away, it's just a calculation. The calculation to the 93 million miles, when it was done, was calculated off of our angle to Venus. That's how the sun's 93 million miles first came about. When they didn't even know how far Venus was away. But they used the 93 million miles then to determine how far Venus was away, to calculate it. And so on and so on and so on. So all these numbers that was laid down a long time ago have never been revisited. And they have completely built on and built on and built on and built on to theory after calculation after theory after calculation after theory after calculation until it's nothing but theory and calculation. There's nothing measured. There's nothing proven. There's nothing that meets the scientific method. The scientific method has been replaced by peer review. It's amazing what has happened to science. It's no longer science anymore. It's just scientism. If you look at what they teach in school, they started teaching evolution. It's never been proven. It's just a theory. Why would they teach theory as a law of science?
It's an interesting link back, actually, Jeff, because you mentioned about being a history theorist. And I think the powers that should not be are history theorists. We're discovering more and more that a lot of the stuff, and you mentioned evolution recently, I did a video about dinosaurs, but a lot of this stuff that we call history that's documented isn't necessarily something we can just take as read anymore. Are there any other things that you've discovered off the back of Flat Earth that have maybe led you to other deceptions and other lies?
Well, I mean, the globe deception is the deception that makes all other deceptions possible.
Absolutely. I totally agree.
It is the ultimate deception. So, you know, you hear a bunch of other truthers, they'll say, oh, you're muddying the waters with your silly nonsense. And you're thinking, you know what? This silly nonsense makes all the other silly nonsense possible.
And have
this last Christmas, have
you looked at any of the other silly nonsense, or is it purely Flat Earth that has kept your fascination? I mean, do you go down any other rabbit holes is kind of what I'm asking.
Well, I was a truther of sorts, you know, all my life because I wanted the true history. You know, I didn't want the make-believe history. I wanted the true historical value of what money is, or how banking, or how money is created, how it's put into the system, how wars are started, how wars are ended. You know, there's so many things that, you know, I was a news junkie, man. I could tell you anything you will need to know about, you know, the geopolitics. Doesn't matter where in the world. I mean, most of my friends, if you gave them a blank map and said, here, point it, I don't know, let's just say Yemen. Just point at Yemen. I mean, unless it was written there and they had time to sit there and scan through all the names of all the countries, they wouldn't be able to tell you. And it's funny how everything that happens in the world is just it's one lie after another, after another, after another, after another, after another, after another. And you get so sick of the lies. And as a flat earther, generally I was a truther first, you know, whether it be about war, about money, about terrorism and anything else, or even education. You know, I was out there, you know, people would their eyes would glaze over when I'd start talking about the money, or when I started talking about the war, or when I started talking about the drugs, the medical industrial complex, the prison industrial complex, the security industrial complex. When I'd start talking about these things, you know, my friends and family in general, man, their eyes would just glaze over because they wanted to just believe what the news was telling them, what the news on TV was telling them.
So what advice would you give people then, Jeff, if they've come across flat Earth or maybe another different lie or two, and they're trying to broach this subject with people, and you phrased it, they glaze over, but I would probably phrase it differently and say they react with pure hatred. But in either instance, what advice would you give to somebody who's trying to broach this subject with maybe a friend or a family member?
Don't push it. Don't push it. Don't push it hard. And then that'd be just like any other truth. You can put your evidence out there, and if they're willing to look at it, they're willing to look at it. If they're not willing to look at it, don't push it. Allow people to believe what they want to believe.
Yeah, it's very good advice. I mean, would you say that the radar and targeting systems are your finest flat Earth proofs? Are they the thing that you would first present to somebody if you were going to broach the subject?
No, because I have talked about this with other people, and it really doesn't. It just doesn't make a mark on them. Some of the biggest things would just be the lack of visible curvature, not what you can't see on some boat that you can't get on.
So you go straight to debunking the heliocentric model and pointing out that there is no curve.
Yeah, well, do you feel like you're spinning at 1,000 miles an hour? How do planes travel from east to west? You can't have it both ways. If the atmosphere, let's just, whenever I'm talking to somebody and I'm just trying to broach the subject, you got to start with the real basic head scratchers. The stuff that'll just make them think when they leave you, whether they even agree or disagree or whatever, just when they get off to themselves and they're thinking about this stuff that you were talking about, can they really think of it, and can they understand what they're thinking of? So if you got a world that's spinning from east to west, a globe that's spinning now, if the atmosphere is spinning with the globe, then you must assume that you should be able to just levitate off the ground and the world would spin below you. So if the world is, if you're just say right here or wherever you're in the UK, so you're spinning at approximately 925 miles an hour where you're at, right? So
pretty close.
So if you got a Boeing 747 whose maximum speed or cruise speed is 580 miles an hour, depending on which model you're looking at, but 580 miles an hour, should not be able to even keep up with the spin.
Yeah, quite so.
So when you're looking at when you say if you just look at plane routes going from one point on the east and one point on the west and say, okay, if it takes you 10 hours to get there, it should either take you 20 hours to get back or 5 hours to get back.
Yeah, it's a great example of them trying to have their cake and eat it. So
exactly. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And the globe model is just about that. It is nothing but have your cake and eat it too. It is the biggest two ways. I got to have it my way and my way and my way. You cannot have any dissent at all. And it is the craziest thing. We were talking about, how people, when you just say the words flat earth and how it has been so stigmatized, it's ridiculous, it's stupid, it's this, there is no other two terms that you could come up with. You could just say he's a Nazi, right? You point at somebody and say he's a Nazi. And that's not even going to ring the same bell as looking at somebody and pointing down and say he's a flat earther.
Yeah, it does rain terror, doesn't it? Those terms, that term.
It really does.
About your plane example, Jeff, it's a nice one because when they try and have their cake and eat it, you often have a nice scientific experiment to debunk their own nonsense. So in the case of the planes, you're saying that the plane shouldn't move with the Earth spinning below it. And yet the Foucault pendulum, and Foucault, who was the guy who gave gyroscopes their name. He didn't invent them, but I'm pretty sure he gave them the name. But you have the Foucault pendulum, which demonstrates the Earth spinning below it. And yet,
well, and most people have never even heard of that. The only people that even bring that up are the people that are suffering the most cognitive dissonance. That they research to find the proofs of the globe, and this is one of the things that they find that supposedly is proof of the globe, yet has been debunked several times, if not hundreds of times already.
Yeah, exactly. It should work based on their own principles of the Coriolis effect. You know, if the Foucault pendulum does show the Earth spinning beneath it as the pendulum is suspended, then a helicopter would just go up.
Exactly.
And then below it.
I mean, that's a cake and eat it too. Exactly. That's a cake and eat it too. So, you know, there's so many basic things that you can look at and say, okay, you know, without bringing up this pendulum, if you want to call that a pedestrian argument, that's fine. But it's something that most people don't even know what it is, you know, when you're talking to them about anything when it comes to the flat Earth. It's easier just to shoot down things as they are put forth. Just the basic things. You know, you say, look, and most people most people out there don't even understand the model that they believe in. Like, just to lay down some facts. Okay, look, the Earth is spinning. The Earth is a globe. It's spinning at the equator at 1,100 miles an hour. It's in turn rotating in an oblique orbit around the sun at 70,000 miles an hour with all the other planets in tow and all the satellites around it. That sun is screaming through the galaxy at 500 million miles an hour on an arc.
Some crazy nonsense right there, Jeff.
Okay, just that right there. Most people don't even get that believe in the globe. They don't even understand how their own model works. They assume the sun is stationary and in the galaxy and everything else rotates around it. That's what they believe. Not that the sun is actually moving. The sun is sitting still. We're all rotating around it. That's how most...
The name implies it, doesn't it? Heliocentric model implies that the sun is stationary, and yet you completely blow people's mind when you tell them that it's traveling at 500,000 miles an hour and essentially everything in the heliocentric system is spinning and corkscrewing around a black hole that we have no proof of. It's just mind-blowing.
Right. And then, now a lot of people that come forth trying to debunk flat Earth, they'll say, well, how do you explain the pole stars? And I throw the question right back at them. No, how do you explain the pole stars? Well, it just proves the Earth is spinning. And I say, how does it prove the Earth is spinning when the Earth is rotating around a sun that's going through the galaxy at an arc? That means we are chasing the North Star at the same arc or in line with it, and our southern pole star is chasing us, but doing something even more weird. If you just think about it in your head or try to draw it on paper, you'll see it just can't exist if there is no parallax. And I mean a great deal of parallax. And I tend to when you're talking about this with just the regular pedestrian, the person that never even heard about it or whatever, and you start talking about parallax and pole stars and they just go to sleep on you. It's easier just to break it down like this. Well, look, let's just say I put you in my car and we went out to the highway, and I pulled over on the side of the road, and I walked over to the tree line on the side of the highway, and I stapled a white piece of paper onto a tree. And then I got back in the car and I put a blindfold on you. And I cranked up the car and started driving. And I drove you around for hours and hours and hours. You say you got to pee. I say, man, we ain't nowhere near a rest stop. And we're driving and driving and driving. And you know I'm driving fast because you can feel it. And I'm just burning the highway up. And finally, I stop the car. I take your blindfold off. And you're so happy to get that blindfold off. All you need to do is get out the car and walk over to that tree line so you can pee. And you walk out to that tree line and you see that piece of paper I stapled to the tree before we ever got started. You can get back into the car and say, man, have you been driving me around in circles? Because that's exactly what's been going on in the heliocentric model. We've been screaming through the galaxy at 500 million miles an hour on an arc. Yet, we see no difference in the stars today than we did 7,000 years ago.
The pole star hasn't moved an inch.
No, it's supposedly moving with us. We are chasing it, and we are being followed by the southern pole star. And while we're chasing, now they're not saying this, the globalists aren't saying this, I'm saying this because it's the only way it's possible. If we can still see the southern pole star and the northern pole star that we saw 7,000 years ago, that means, let's just say the arc that the sun is traveling in is a counterclockwise arc. Think of it in your head. Close your eyes and think of a clock. And think of the sun traveling in a circle around that clock. Now put a star in front of the sun and on the back of the sun. And those are your pole stars. We're chasing the Polaris, and the southern pole star is chasing us. But we're having to travel at a much larger fish-tailed arc to chase Polaris, and our southern star is having to travel in a much, much more fish-tailed arc than us to stay lined up with us. Do you understand what I'm saying?
No, Jeff, because it's all nonsense. It's just a whole load of nonsense.
Right. I mean, it doesn't matter how you pick it apart.
You've given a really explanation for something that is explained in the heliocentric model, but ultimately, it's all nonsense. It's all just a load of rubbish. None of it actually happens. We're not moving. We're completely stationary. Yes. There is no curve. We're not on a globe. Yes. It's all just nonsense.
It's absolute nonsense. I mean, the more you think about the heliocentric model, the more you have to conclude that really, what if I believe in nonsense, what do you believe in?
Yeah, quite right. I mean, I like to give the simple proofs. I mean, again, it's always good when they try and have their cake and eat it. So it's back to the simple stuff like the boats going over the horizon. So they tell us,
and that's where cognitive dissonance kicks in right there. Because even when you give nice, concise, and clear proof, they totally ignore it and move on to the next.
Well, they've got it wrapped up, but it's with a contradiction. So they tell you they go over the horizon, and yet you can't have that effect increase with altitude. So obviously, if the boat does go over the horizon, as they suggest it does in the heliocentric model, because we're on a globe and the Earth is curved, you should see a much bigger curve as you go up. In other words, it's increased exponentially because it's 8 inches per mile squared. So therefore, the higher you go, the further along that curve you should be able to see. Of course, they have
and when you say, look, the ship goes over the horizon, right? And they say, right. And that horizon is your curve. It's going beyond the curve. That's right. Well, here's a pair of binoculars. Bring that ship right back. Oh, I brought that ship right back. Now, you see, you're going to wait for it. It's going to go over a curve again. Okay, it went over a curve again. Now, here's a telescope. Bring it right back. Oh, okay, there it is right here. Now, the cognitive dissonance is where when they decided that the Earth was a globe was when they could see the ship go over the horizon. This is what led them. This was one of the first proofs of the globe. And it was stuck to from there on out, because back then you couldn't go down to Walmart and buy a pair of binoculars. Only very few people had looking glasses.
That's it. The same applies with sort of simple proofs like with the same principle in mind. Everything that you see when you're stood at the beach is falling away from you in the heliocentric model. The water is all below your feet as you look out to sea. But it isn't. As you look out to sea, it all raises with the effect of perspective to eye level, because it's absolutely flat as a pancake.
Well, but then they'll say, well, no, it's an oblate spheroid, and that's why it seems it's more flat than it should be. And I say, okay, so if you're standing in the sunlight at the equator on the beach, obviously there should be more curve because the sun is over the water, which would be raising the water up to greater proportions. Correct? Correct. So why isn't there more curvature? There should be more curvature on the equator looking north to south in the sunlight or the moonlight than there should be anywhere else.
Yeah, you get a similar effect when you're on a plane and someone will say, well, I can see the curvature, or they'll take a photo and catch a bit of the curved fuselage or the window on the curved fuselage, and they'll say, there's the curve. And of course, if there was a curve that they could see, it would extend around beyond the curve that they can see in that window, and the opposite side of the plane would be lower. But of course, they're flying completely level and flat, and the horizon.
I don't believe. You know, when people say, "Look, I've flown a lot in my life," and unfortunately, I have not flown on an airplane since I have become a flat earther.
It's seeing the eye level horizon on both sides of the plane.
But I can tell you that every time I ever went up in a plane, I never looked out the window, and it even occurred to me to even look for curvature.
Oh, really?
That's
all I ever look for on a plane.
Well, yeah, maybe now.
No, I mean before I was a flat earther, I was traveling internationally, and it's all I did. I would always sit at the window. I'd get up and look at the big window at the back of the plane where the door was, and I'd be looking out, and I was looking across the vast expanse and thinking, God, if only I could go higher, if only I could see that curvature, knowing full well that I couldn't.
Well, I never did, and a lot of times I take what my own actions into account for. You know, all the times that I ever flew on a plane, the last thing I was thinking about was curvature. Even when my job was, you know, in the Navy, you would have thought had something to do with curvature, but it didn't. You know, it just didn't.
Meaningless proof, Jeff. I can say it, and people can just tell me that I haven't got good enough measuring equipment. My eyes aren't good enough.
Yeah.
You've been hitting targets at 70 miles. You know, you've been watching this on a screen, watching it paint that target, and there's no curve, there's no fall away, nothing's in the way. But they'll
tell you, no, that's because light bends, and you can say, look, that's not how infrared works. Infrared does not bend.
No.
It's a straight, you know, lasers don't bend.
Forget what you've seen from a plane. You've got proof, you know, what you can tell people about how the equipment worked and what you were doing, painting targets.
And you would think that would be an end all. You would think that would be an end all argument. But it's not. I mean, it's totally disregarded. It is absolutely and totally disregarded. Yeah, you wouldn't believe how many times I brought that up, and they just disregard it like, you know, well, you know, that's something else.
That's a good
whatever.
Thing, Jeff. That's a good thing about flat Earth. It doesn't matter how much cognitive dissonance you're up against. The Earth is flat, and no matter how much you want to go out and test it, it'll come up flat time and time again. And your proof is just another example of that. Now, people can choose to disregard it, but it doesn't change what you've seen with your own eyes.
You know, nothing trumps, you know, zetetic,
Zetetic.
Zeticism
You got it.
is not a religion. Zeticism is what you can see with your eyes. Unfortunately, science tells you that you can't trust your eyes. And the reason why they don't want you to trust your eyes is because everything else they're trying to tell you just don't work out. That's why they put, why do you think that you were, why do you think your eyes work the way they do? Your eyes work the way they do simply out of survival.
Yeah, they've got to be accurate.
You were made to travel. Just like a bird.
I don't know, Jeff. I sure as hell weren't designed to fly. That's why it's so amazing every time I go on a plane.
All right. Let's just say, birds have a special quality about them that allows them to migrate to the same place, same two places every year. Okay, north and south. And they know exactly where they're going as soon as they get airborne. They can't see this line. They can feel this line, but they can't see this line. But somehow these birds, without any special equipment, without any electronics, without anything, they can go from point A to point B and from point B to point A and point A to point B and do it the same for their whole lives. Go to the same nest from here to there. Birds that migrate and other animals that migrate. They can't see where they're going necessarily because most of these things don't have that great of eyesight except at very long distances. Think of an eagle. They can't see where the crack close up, but they can see a worm coming out of the ground at a half mile away.
Okay.
So your eyes as a human were actually are very, very good eyes. There is no other creature on earth that has eyesight like you have. You have the best eyesight of any creature on earth, even if you wear glasses, because you can see close up and you can see far away, and you can focus in on a lot of things. Here's the cognitive dissonance when it comes to eyesight. You've heard them. I can see the space station as it flies overhead from my front yard. I can see satellites. Satellites are anywhere between 320 and 380 miles up. All satellites, 320 to 380 miles up. You cannot see a school bus a mile away. If I was to take you out to the desert, to a flat plain, park a school bus and take you a mile away from it, you wouldn't be able to see that school bus. Even if it was a straight line of sight to it, you would not be able to see it at all. Why people think they can see a satellite that's a quarter of the size of a school bus at 320 to 380 miles is beyond me.
I mean, I agree because of the distances that you gave, but there's stuff up there. I mean, there's definitely stuff floating on by, Jeff. I don't know what it is, but I've seen it plenty.
Well, they're planes and they're balloons.
Maybe. I don't know.
A plane flying at 40,000 feet, could probably, look like just a little tiny dot of light. What
Sure.
they'll say, what they can see, is not what they think that they're seeing.
Yeah, it's a satellite, or in the case of the ISS, it's a manned spacecraft, which it isn't.
Well, NASA spends 80% of their money on a balloon program.
Yeah, this is where we started off, Jeff. I think actually I've only got one more question for you, Jeff, which is as follows. You've got a fair few answers and you put good quality videos out explaining why stuff like the ISS shouldn't work, which we went through earlier. Since you've come to the discovery of flat Earth, are there any fundamental questions that you haven't got answers for that you'd love to have answers for?
The sun and the moon.
What
The
are
sun and the moon.
Yeah, I completely agree. We have no clue.
I mean, it's there's so many wild theories. I hate theories, but what I have seen here lately is people doing moonlight experiments. Sure. You know what I'm talking about, showing that the moonlight is colder than non-moonlight. That is very, very, very strange and subtly upsetting to me. Because just when you thought it couldn't get any weirder, nope, you're wrong. It just got a whole lot weirder.
How do you mean upsetting?
Because, you know, just... Because, A, you were trying to make up your mind before whether the moon was self-lit or actually lit by something else, like the sun. And then you figure out that the moon is not actually light at all. And now you got a whole new game to look at. That
it's unsettling. It's just more...
Yeah, it leaves more questions. I mean, just the experiment alone leaves you with more questions than it gave you answers. It gave you an answer that gave you a whole new realm of questions to start asking.
Yeah.
How does everybody always see the same face of the moon? You know, I would assume, even if it was flat, that the moon was a ball, and so was the sun.
I mean, there's certainly stuff that indicates that it's ball-shaped. There's something called libration. Essentially, as you see the sides, you'll see more than 50% of a sphere. So you're seeing about 59% if it was a sphere. So you're seeing more on the edges, which would suggest it's...
but everybody sees the same libration no matter where they are.
True.
It doesn't see, if you're standing 10,000 miles away from me and we're both looking at the same moon, you should be able to see one side of it and I should be able to see the other side of it, and we both can see basically the same part in the middle.
Yeah, very good point.
So at any given time, we should be able to have mapped and have good photographs of at least 75% of the moon.
Of course, but that's back to them. They'll just tell you it's too big a distance to see it at a different angle, regardless of how far around the planet you move.
Okay, how about the last picture that NASA put out of the flyby of the satellite between the moon and the sun?
Oh, the epic footage.
Right, that showed a nice smooth moon.
Sure.
On the back side. It wasn't all cratered up.
I mean, we're phrasing this hypothetically, but you and I, we're going to have to get out of this habit when we do these and start saying, because it's complete nonsense, you know, because that epic footage was rubbish.
I've had my own theories and thoughts on why the moon is so cratered up from our side.
Okay.
And that's, I think, that previous civilizations, which we know existed, which don't exist now, that were very high-tech civilizations. They built stuff that we cannot even build today. We have evidence of nuclear holocaust in some parts of the world that is thousands of years old. We have clear-cut evidence of all these megalithic structures that we can't see.
What's the connection to the moon, though, Jeff?
The moon is, I think, that a previous civilization shot it up. Blew holes in it.
Interesting theory. I mean, there's something to that in the respect that all of the craters are facing us. In other words, all of the things that would have hit it would have come directly from us in terms of.
I'm thinking a lot of people would say, well, why would they shoot at it? Why would you not to destroy it? But maybe, just maybe, there was something up there that was scaring them to death.
Yeah, again, it looks like sort of electric scarification to me. So, again,
I've heard that, and that actually makes a lot of sense too. But there again, we're still getting a whole lot more. The questions we're asking, we're so far beyond flat Earth now. Obviously, it's flat, whereas obviously it's a globe, whereas obviously it's flat. Now we're on to a whole new realm of questions. My questions are, could somebody please nail down, well, we got the flat Earth nailed down, got that, figured it out, that's what it is. We know it's not a globe.
We know it's flat. It's not a globe.
We know it's flat. We don't know if it's a dome. We don't know if it's an infinite plane. We don't know.
We don't know what the moon is.
Because we've not seen it. But the stuff we can see, okay, let's figure that out. The sun, what is it? The moon, what is it? Obviously, they serve more than one purpose. They probably serve more than 100 purposes. You think of the moon having cold light. We know the moon has cold light.
That's pretty
proven,
nice.
Scientifically proven, the moon has cold light. Why would the moon have cold light? There is no such thing as a cold light. Man has not been able to make a cold light.
What you're describing, Jeff, is part of the biggest excitement for me about Flat Earth. The fact that we as individuals, yes, we can do it as a collective, but as an individual, you're party to making fundamental discoveries about where we live. And that for me is really, really exciting. Just one last thing before we wrap up, Jeff. Do you encourage people to actually contact you?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Anybody can contact me.
Maybe give your website addresses or your email addresses or your...
Yeah, my email address is Jeff at Intella... Let me spell this. Jeff at intelli-media.org. INTELLI-MEDIA.org.
And what's the name of your YouTube channel, Jeff?
Room Painter.
No, it's not.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
Jeff Stewart. You should know the name of your own YouTube channel.
Oh no, the Earl is Room Painter.
Okay.
I think, isn't it? Back when I first started my YouTube channel, I named it one of my business names, which was Room Painter. So you can reach me at jeff@roompainter.com as well.
Cool.
Or Jeff at FETV.xyz or what, I don't know. So here's one thing I wanted to say before we get lost and get going.
Yeah, no worries, Jeff. I mean, the main reason I've had you on was to get concise flat Earth proof out of you, because I hope people have got this across in the show. You're painting targets at 70 miles, proving the Earth is flat. To me, is just heart-stopping. It's fantastic, but it often.
Yeah, well, it is great. It is great information. Don't get me wrong. No, I enjoy being privy to the information. Yet for my experiences, I know Nathan Oakley could go around all day tomorrow saying, "Hey, man, I know this dude named Jeff that freaking was doing this," and they're just going to look at you with a blind eye. They're just not going to even pay attention to it. It's amazing what they don't pay attention to. You're right. It doesn't matter whether it's GMOs or fluoride or anything else. I mean, it's just amazing what people don't pay attention to. They pay attention to absolutely nothing.
But with the flat Earth thing, Jeff, it still remains a fact. The Earth is flat.
Yes. Yeah. All right. So here's my parting words on the flat Earth.
Cool.
Just as the globalists today talk about Pythagoras and they talk about Aristotle. I swear that is the hardest thing for me to say. Eratosthenes and Plato and all these other guys, just as they talk about them today, hopefully, it won't take 500 years, but hopefully one day people will be talking about the names of the people that you're seeing posting videos today with their proofs of why it's not a globe. Hopefully,
an interesting thought.
Yeah,
and down in history somehow, Jeff.
Absolutely. I totally believe it. Because, you know, all these guys in the historical account in their time, they didn't think they were nobody. They didn't think they were somebody. They were out there when the earth was flat, thinking it was a globe and coming up with their oddball proofs. And you look at the proofs. Look at the guy that measured the mass of the earth. Look at his proof. 2 metal balls swinging between a stick. If I built the same thing in my garage today and invited my neighbor over and said, here, look what I built. I can measure the weight of the earth. They'd look at me like I was nuts. But
Cavendish was nuts. He was like a total recluse, wasn't he?
Yeah, well, a lot of them were. You look at somebody like Albert Einstein that worked his whole life. A good portion of his life at his theory of relativity. I mean, he worked day and night for 20 years on his theory of relativity, which is not E equals MC squared. It was E equals MC squared divided by a bunch of other figures. But he came to America at the same time he was going through a divorce and met with Edwin Hubble. And the next day dropped the divisible off of his theory of relativity because it conflicted with what they were pushing. He worked his whole life. That'd be like working your whole life or half your life at coming up with just one sentence that makes everything come clear. Let's just say the sentence is, I love my mom very much. And then you meet somebody, and in one day you change that sentence that took you 20 years. It says, I love my mom very much. You change that sentence to, I love. How could one man work half his life, night and day, on something only to change the whole thing after one meeting with one person? Now, I didn't work my whole life to believe it was a globe. I was taught my whole life to believe it was a globe. A lot of people would say, well, Jeff, how in the heck can you just flip over, you know? Most flat earthers don't just flip. They see something and they start doing their own research. I get made fun of all the time by the globe heads, man. They're all over my channel all the time, just dropping comment after comment after comment of how stupid I am, how crazy I am, how ridiculous I am, how my, blah, 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 blah. When the truth is, flat earthers do more research, deeper research, but they don't research things from a peer review standpoint. They just research things from a truth standpoint. What makes sense? What adds up? And that's what you believe. You don't believe the stuff that doesn't make sense. You always throw that off into another basket. If it needs a theory or a mathematical formula for it to work, then that goes in this basket over here. Everything that you ever learned, anytime you're looking at the flat earth, Always. Even when it comes to flat earth proof, just put it all in a basket over to the side and look at everything with new eyes, like you've never seen it or heard it before. And that's about the easiest way to explain the flat earth is just the perception. If I had to sum up flat earth in one word, it would be perception.
Yeah, spot on. Self-realization and perception. Jeff Stewart, you've been an absolutely superb guest. Thank you very, very much for being on Flat Earth UK this evening.
Well, I appreciate you asking me on the Flat Earth UK this evening. And, Nathan, we've been trying to get on here together for a long time. And we just ain't been able to get it all lined up. Unfortunately, they work you to death. You only get Sundays and Wednesdays off. Today's our Wednesday.
Nah, it's easy peasy, mate. And when I've got guests like you on, you make the job of doing this a joy. I know you're not referring to this, but there we go.
I know. I've been wanting to get. I've been wanting to get on here with you for. You're the only regular show that I would do. I've turned everybody else. I've turned everybody else down.
I know you give Patricia a hard time. I was going to wrap it up there, but maybe extend the olive branch a bit further than you have. Maybe give Patricia a bit of a fair hearing, because I know you give some of these people a bit more grief than they possibly deserve.
I give everybody grief, and I only give people grief just to see if they got fight in them.
I know. Some people are a bit more sensitive than me.
But anyway, if you got a little bit of fight in you, I want to do business with you.
Definitely. Well, you've been a real sport. I'm really glad that I've had you on. So once again, Jeff Stewart, thank you very much for being on Flat Earth UK. It's been a real pleasure.
And thank you, sir. I appreciate being on here, and you have a wonderful night. And we look to see you on our channel with some hangouts with us pretty soon.
Definitely. I shall do that. And to all of you who have joined us in the chat room, thank you very, very much for being here and seeing Jeff at his best. And the Flat Earth proof has been amazing. I've been Nathan Oakley. I will see you all in the next video.